In today's video, we're going to be looking at HTML and the basics of it. And by the end of the video, you're going to know what HTML is, why bother learning it, and we're also going to look at what HTML involves in terms of syntax. So let's get right into it. Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to J&J GeoDev. I'm Jiros, and today we're going to look at the basics of HTML. Well, to start off, what is HTML? Well, HTML is basically a markup language and it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. But what does that mean? You may have heard about programming language, but what the heck is a markup language? Well, a markup language essentially allows us to lay out the content of a web page. So that's pretty much the main purpose of it. And the word content basically refers to headings or maybe paragraphs on a website, or maybe even things like images and videos. So as you can see on the right, we have an example of a website. So as we can see, we have a heading, learn to code. So that is the big piece of typography. So that would be a heading. So that's one piece of content. Then right underneath it, you can see that we have a paragraph. And then at the top where the nav bar is, we can see that we have these wee icons. So that would be either an icon or an image. That basically tells us that HTML is basically a tool that provides us with the building blocks of a web page. So the syntax is very simple. So we basically have elements and tags, and the tags can either be opening or closing, but not all elements have a closing tag. So let's look at an example. So as you can see on the right, we have the letter P surrounded by a greater than sign and a less than sign. Well, let's break this down a bit more to really get a better understanding of what is really happening here. So we basically have these two brackets and then the element goes in the middle. So right underneath it, you can see that we have a pretty similar looking tag, but the only difference is that we have a forward slash right before the P. So by putting that forward slash, we are basically saying that this is going to be a closing tag. So let's have a look at some of the elements in HTML and how we can utilize them to build a web page. So to start off, we have the headings. So basically headings are used to indicate whenever we want to start a new section on the website. And they basically represent a small body of text, as they are usually very short, a maximum of a sentence or two. And they obviously differ in size as well. So H1 is the biggest and H6 is the smallest. So basically there's 6 different tags from 1 to 6. And 1 is the biggest and 6 is the smallest basically. And as you can see on the right, we have the exact values for every heading. So these are basically the default values for the sizes of every heading. So on the left, we have the actual size of it. So how it would appear on a web page. Then in the middle column, we have the pixel point value for these headings. So these are their default values. And on the right, we have something called EEM, so the M unit. So that's basically just a different unit that we can use in order to style elements and set their sizes to. But this is a whole different topic for another video. So next up, we have another element that is related to typography, and that is the paragraphs. So the paragraphs are commonly used and they basically represent a larger body of text, and they can be either short or long based on the content of that paragraph, and they're the same size, so they're basically represented with the P tag. So on the right, we have an example of the P tag or the paragraph tag, and as you can see, it has a opening tag, so the two brackets, and inside we have the letter P. So that basically indicates that it is going to be a paragraph element. And here, as you can see, it also has a closing tag, which is denoted by the forward slash that comes right before the P. And in between the opening and the closing tag, that's where we put the actual content of the paragraph. So the actual text that is going to be represented by that paragraph element. So next up, we have a bit more interesting element coming up. So the divisions or the containers, they are once again very common, and they're basically used to group content together, but they also vary in size and are represented with the div tag. And as you can see on the right, we have an example of how we would actually implement this div tag. So once again, we have an opening tag and a closing tag. And basically in between these two tags, everything that we put inside of will be nested. So that's where we put all the elements that we want to group together. And that's pretty much how we use the div tag. So next up we have the anchor or the link element. And they're very commonly used in websites. And their main purpose is to basically link two or more places on the web together. And they also help the user traverse a web page or the web. By clicking on the anchor, they're going to be taken somewhere. And they're fairly short, and they basically are represented with the A tag. So as you can see on the right, we have an example of the syntax of this anchor element. So once again, we have an opening and a closing tag. And in between, we have the text that is going to be displayed onto the web page. But how exactly do we tell the anchor element where to take the user to? That's where the element attribute href comes in. So the way you can think about element attributes is like special bits of information that belong to that particular element. So in this case, we're going to use the href attribute, which basically points to a place on the web that the user will be taken to once they click on the anchor element. And in this case, it is pointing to google.com. So whenever the user clicks on this anchor element, they're going to be taken to the main homepage of Google. So far we have covered elements that are related to typography. So the next element that we're going to look at is a bit more different. So it's the image element. And it is a very common element that you're going to encounter on pretty much every website. And they can be used to convey a message. And they also support different formats such as PNG, JPEG, SVG, and others. And are also represented with the image tag. But the interesting thing about images is that they're self-closing, so there's no closing tag, there's only an opening tag that self-closes. So as you can see on the right, we have an example of the syntax of the image tag. And one thing that I want to note here is that the / after the image is optional, so the tag is still going to function properly even if you leave it and don't include it. And in order for the image element to work, we need to pass a few different attributes to it. So the main attribute that we need to pass to the image element is the source attribute. And the source attribute basically tells the browser where we are getting our image from. So it basically specifies the location of that image. And next up we have the alt attribute, which basically stands for alternate text. And it is basically a text that is going to be displayed if our image is unavailable or if the person visiting the web page is using a screen reader. And two more attributes that we can pass onto the image is the width and the height of the image. And that's pretty much how we implement the image tag. And we have covered a few elements so far, but you might be wondering, how do we actually structure a HTML file? And there are basically four main tags that are responsible for implementing the structure of a HTML file. Well, let's start off with the doctype HTML tag. So the doctype HTML tag is the first tag that we put on our HTML file, and it basically specifies the version of HTML that we are using. And its purpose is basically to tell the browser what type of document to expect. So next up we have the HTML tag. So once again we have an opening and a closing tag. So these tags basically serve as a container for the next two tags. So the head tag once again has an opening and a closing tag, and essentially it serves as a container for any metadata. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm only going to cover the title tag. So the purpose of the title tag is to set the title of our web page. So next up we have the body tag. So once again it has an opening and a closing tag. And essentially the body tag serves the purpose of a container for our normal elements, so the ones that we have covered so far, so for example headings or paragraphs. And this is basically how we structure a web page. So let's have a look at a very basic example of the structure of a web page. So as you can see, we have a doctype HTML at the top, followed by two HTML tags, and inside of them we have the head and the body tags. So we have a title for the web page, and right underneath it we have the content of the web page. And this is an example of a very basic web page. But that's pretty much all for today, guys. If you feel like this video was useful and you got some value from it, feel free to subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. And thank you very much everyone for watching, and I hope you have a great day.